The letter arrived in Boston on a Tuesday morning in late September of 1882, and Eleanor Brennan held it in her trembling hands like it was made of gold instead of simple paper. She had written to the agency 3 months ago when her world had collapsed around her, and she had nowhere else to turn. And now here was her answer, her lifeline, her escape from the suffocating walls of her aunt's narrow house, where she had been reduced to little more than an unpaid servant. The handwriting was careful and measured, the words of a man who had thought long about what he wanted to say. His name was William Foster, and he owned a ranch outside of Brownsville, Texas. He was 30 years old, unmarried, and looking for a wife who would share his life on the frontier. He did not promise luxury or ease, but he promised honesty, respect, and a home of her own. Eleanor read those words over and over until she could recite them from memory. She was 23 years old, and she had stopped believing that life held anything beautiful for her until this moment. Her aunt had called her foolish when she announced her decision. Her cousin had laughed outright, saying no decent man would send for a wife through the mail unless something was terribly wrong with him. But Eleanor had made up her mind. She wrote back to William Foster that same evening, accepting his proposal, and within 2 weeks she was on a train heading southwest with a small trunk containing everything she owned in the world. The journey took 9 days. She watched through the window as the green landscape of the east gradually transformed into something wild and endless. The cities gave way to towns, the towns to settlements, and finally to vast stretches of land where the sky seemed bigger than anything she had ever imagined. She had spent her whole life in Boston, where buildings crowded together and people walked past each other without meeting eyes. Out here, the emptiness was both frightening and exhilarating. When the train finally pulled into Brownsville, Eleanor's heart was beating so hard she could barely breathe. She smoothed down her traveling dress, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days, and adjusted her bonnet. Her reflection in the train window showed a pale face with large brown eyes and dark hair pulled back severely. She had never considered herself pretty, and she wondered what William Foster would think when he saw her. The platform was dusty and crowded with people. Eleanor stepped down carefully, clutching her trunk, and looked around. She had no idea what William looked like beyond his description of himself as tall with brown hair. There were several men on the platform, but none of them seemed to be looking for anyone. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, feeling more alone with each passing minute. Had he changed his mind? Had he seen her through the window and decided she would not do? She was just beginning to panic when she heard a voice behind her. Miss Brennan. She turned around and found herself looking up at a man who matched the description in the letters. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that spoke of years working under the Texas sun. His hair was indeed brown, though streaked with lighter shades from sun exposure, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue-gray. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat that he quickly removed when she met his gaze, but it was his expression that caught her attention. He looked at her with such uncertainty, such naked hope mixed with fear, that she felt something shift in her chest. This was not a man who was confident in his choice. This was someone as scared as she was. "Yes," she said, her voice coming out barely above a whisper. "I am Eleanor Brennan." "William Foster," he said, and offered his hand. His grip was firm but gentle when she took it. "I apologize for being late. There was trouble with one of the horses this morning." "It is quite all right," Eleanor said. She meant to smile to put them both at ease, but her face felt frozen. They stood there awkwardly for a moment until William gestured toward a wagon nearby. "I brought the wagon to take us back to the ranch. It is about an hour's ride from town. I hope that is acceptable, of course." He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and carried it to the wagon. Eleanor followed, very aware of the curious glances from other people on the platform. She supposed they all knew why she was here. In a town this size, everyone probably knew everyone else's business. The wagon was simple but well maintained. William helped her up onto the seat with a gentleness that surprised her, then climbed up beside her. He clicked his tongue at the horses, and they started moving down the main street of Brownsville. Eleanor had never seen anything like this town. The buildings were low and spread out, many of them made of wood that looked bleached by the sun. The streets were wide and dusty, and there seemed to be horses everywhere. Men walked around with guns on their hips as casually as Boston gentlemen carried walking sticks. It was a different world entirely. "I know it must seem rough compared to what you are used to," William said after they had ridden in silence for several minutes. His voice was deep and had a slight drawl she found pleasant. "Boston is a big city, and this is just a small border town." "It is different," Eleanor admitted, "but not in a bad way, just different." He glanced at her and she thought she saw relief in his expression. "The ranch is simpler still. I have a house, but it is nothing fancy, 3 rooms and a porch. I built it myself about 5 years ago." "That sounds quite adequate," Eleanor said. She folded her hands in her lap and tried to think of something else to say. All the questions she wanted to ask seemed too forward, too personal for this first meeting. William seemed to be having the same difficulty. They rode in awkward silence through town and out into the open country. Eleanor watched the landscape unfold around them with growing wonder. She had never seen so much space. The land rolled away in all directions, covered with tough grass and scattered brush. In the distance, she could see the shapes of cattle grazing. "How long have you had the ranch?" she finally asked. "About 7 years now," William said. He seemed relieved to have something concrete to discuss. "I came out here from Missouri after my parents passed. Started with just a small piece of land and a dozen head of cattle. Built it up from there." "That must have been very difficult." "It was," he acknowledged. "Still is some days. Ranching is not easy work, and doing it alone is harder still. That is why I decided to write to the agency." Eleanor appreciated his honesty. "I must confess, I do not know much about ranching. I grew up in the city." "I do not expect you to work the cattle," William said quickly. "That is my job, but running a household out here takes work too. Cooking, keeping house, tending a garden if you are willing. And the company would be welcome." The way he said that last part, so quietly and with such obvious loneliness, made Eleanor's heart ache. She realized that this man had been alone for a very long time, and that he had taken a leap of faith in sending for her just as she had taken one in coming. "I am a hard worker," she said, "and I am a decent cook, though I have only worked with a regular kitchen. I imagine things are different out here." "I will teach you what you need to know," William said, "and you can teach me what you know. We will figure it out together." It was the first suggestion that they might actually become partners, and Eleanor found herself warming to the idea. She looked at him more carefully now, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with competent ease, the slight squint lines around his eyes from years of looking out at the horizon. He was handsome in a rugged way, she decided, though she could see the weariness in him too. Whatever had made him decide to send for a wife, it was not just about having someone to cook his meals. The ranch came into view after about an hour's ride. It was nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it. The house was exactly as he had described, a simple wooden structure with a wide porch. There was a barn nearby and several corrals. Everything looked neat and well kept, which told Eleanor a lot about the man beside her. William pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped her down. Eleanor stood there for a moment, looking at what would be her new home. It was smaller than her aunt's house in Boston, but it was hers, or it would be once they were married. "The wedding," she said suddenly, realizing they had not discussed the practical details. "When did you wish to have the ceremony?" William set her trunk down on the porch and turned to face her. "I spoke to the minister in town. He can perform the ceremony whenever we are ready. I thought perhaps we could wait a few days, give you time to settle in and be sure of your decision. I have made up the spare room for you." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration. Many men would have insisted on marrying immediately, anxious to claim what they felt they had paid for through the agency fees and travel costs. But William was offering her time, offering her a choice. "That is very kind," she said. "Perhaps 3 days. I would like to wash my traveling clothes and make myself more presentable." 3 days, William agreed. He picked up her trunk again and carried it inside. The interior of the house was sparse but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a wood stove, a simple table, and 2 chairs. There were shelves on one wall with dishes and supplies. A doorway led to what must be William's bedroom, and another to the room he had mentioned preparing for her. Her room contained a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand. It was plain but adequate, and the window looked out over the prairie. Eleanor set her bonnet on the dresser and looked around. This would be hers for the next 3 days, and then she would move into the other room, into William's room, and become his wife in truth. The thought made her nervous and excited in equal measure. She had never been with a man before. Her aunt had given her the most cursory explanation of marital duties, making it sound like an unpleasant obligation to be endured. But Eleanor had read more than her aunt knew, had listened to other women talk when they did not know she was listening, and she suspected there might be more to it than that. William was standing in the doorway, watching her with those steady blue-gray eyes. "I will let you rest and freshen up," he said. "I need to check on the cattle before dark. There is water in the kitchen, and help yourself to anything you need. I will be back in a few hours to make supper." "I can make supper," Eleanor offered, "if you show me where everything is." He looked surprised, then pleased. "I would appreciate that. Let me show you." He walked her through the kitchen, showing her where he kept supplies and how to work the stove. Eleanor paid careful attention, noting the differences from what she was used to but confident she could manage. William seemed impressed by how quickly she understood. "I will bring in more wood before I go," he said. "And there is a root cellar out back with vegetables and such. Take whatever you need." After he left, Eleanor stood in the kitchen and took a deep breath. This was her life now. No more cramped quarters in her aunt's house. No more bitter comments about being a burden. No more feeling like she had nowhere to belong. This might be the middle of nowhere, Texas, but it was somewhere she could build something new. She explored the house more thoroughly, taking inventory of supplies and making mental notes. William kept things organized, which made her task easier. She found flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, and various other staples. In the root cellar, she discovered potatoes, onions, and even some carrots. Eleanor decided to make a simple stew. It was hearty and would feed them both well. As she worked, cutting vegetables and browning the salt pork, she felt herself starting to relax. This was familiar territory. She might not know anything about ranching, but she knew how to cook a meal. The sun was setting when William returned. She heard him outside washing up at the pump, and then he came in smelling of soap and hard work. He stopped when he saw the table set and the pot of stew bubbling on the stove. "That smells wonderful," he said, and there was genuine appreciation in his voice. "I hope it tastes as good as it smells," Eleanor said. She ladled out 2 bowls and brought them to the table along with some bread she had found wrapped in cloth. They sat across from each other and ate in silence for a few minutes. Eleanor watched him covertly, noticing how he ate with a steady, unhurried pace, as if he was savoring the meal. Finally, he looked up and met her eyes. "This is very good," he said. "Better than anything I have made in years." "You are too kind," Eleanor said, but she felt pleased nonetheless. "I mean it," William insisted. "I appreciate the effort." They finished eating and Eleanor started to clear the dishes, but William stopped her. "Let me help. You have had a long journey." They washed dishes together, standing side by side at the basin. Their hands occasionally brushed, and each time Eleanor felt a little jolt of awareness. He was a stranger still, but he was going to be her husband, and she was going to have to get used to his proximity. That night, lying in the narrow bed in her small room, Eleanor listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie. There were no carriage wheels on cobblestones, no vendors calling out their wares, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. Instead, she heard crickets singing, the rustle of wind through grass, and once, far in the distance, what might have been a coyote howling. She thought about William, alone in the next room, and wondered what had made him so lonely that he would send for a bride from across the country. She thought about the careful way he spoke to her, the consideration he showed, the sadness she had glimpsed in his eyes. There was a story there, she was certain, and she hoped that in time he would trust her enough to tell it. The next morning, Eleanor woke early to find William already up and gone. There was fresh water in the kitchen and the fire had been started in the stove. She made coffee and biscuits and was just pulling them from the oven when he came back in. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat. His hair was damp from washing, and she realized he must have cleaned up before coming inside. "Good morning," Eleanor replied. "I made breakfast." They ate together again, and the silence was a little less awkward than the day before. After breakfast, William offered to show her around the ranch, and Eleanor accepted eagerly. She wanted to understand his world, the place where she would be living. He showed her the barn first, introducing her to the horses with evident pride. There was a big bay gelding named Buck that William said was his primary working horse, and a gentler mare named Daisy that he suggested might be suitable for Eleanor to learn to ride. "I have never ridden a horse," Eleanor admitted. "In Boston, we took carriages or walked." "I will teach you," William said. "It is important out here. If something were to happen to me, you would need to be able to ride into town for help." The practical nature of the comment reminded Eleanor of just how isolated they were. In the city, help was always nearby. Out here, they only had each other. William showed her the cattle next, riding out to where they were grazing. Eleanor rode in front of him on Buck, held secure by his arm around her waist. The closeness was both unsettling and oddly comforting. She could feel the steady warmth of him behind her, the strength in the arm that kept her safe. The cattle were scattered across the grassland, grazing peacefully. William explained how he managed the herd, how he moved them to different grazing areas, how he watched for signs of disease or injury. Eleanor listened carefully, trying to understand the rhythms of this life. "It is beautiful out here," she said as they sat on the horse looking out over the land. "So much space." "Too much space sometimes," William said quietly. "It can get very quiet." Eleanor turned her head slightly, trying to see his face. "Is that why you wrote to the agency? For company?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Partly," he admitted. "But also because I wanted a family. I wanted someone to build something with, not just a ranch but a life. I got tired of coming home to an empty house every night." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep in Eleanor's chest. She understood that loneliness, that feeling of being adrift without purpose or connection. It was what had driven her to answer his letter in the first place. "I understand," she said softly. "I felt very alone in Boston, even surrounded by people. My parents died when I was 16, and I went to live with my aunt. She never let me forget that I was a burden, that she was doing me a great favor by giving me a room. I wanted somewhere I could belong, somewhere I was wanted." William's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "You are wanted here," he said. "I want you to know that. Whatever happens between us, whatever we become to each other, you have a place here." Eleanor blinked back unexpected tears. No one had said anything like that to her in 7 years. "Thank you," she whispered. They rode back to the house in comfortable silence. Eleanor felt something shifting between them, a tentative connection forming. They were still strangers in many ways, but they were beginning to see each other as real people rather than abstract solutions to their problems. That evening, after another shared meal, they sat on the porch together and watched the sunset. The sky turned magnificent shades of orange and red and purple, and Eleanor thought she had never seen anything so beautiful. "I am glad I came here," she said impulsively. William looked at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I am glad you came too." The second day passed in much the same way, with Eleanor learning more about the ranch and William's routines. She cleaned the house thoroughly, washed her clothes and hung them to dry in the hot Texas sun, and experimented with cooking different meals. William seemed to appreciate every effort she made, which gave her confidence. On the third day, the day before their planned wedding, William rode into town for supplies. He invited Eleanor to come along, and she accepted. She wanted to see the town again and meet some of the people who would be her neighbors. Brownsville was busy that morning. William helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm as they walked down the main street. Eleanor was very aware of the curious looks they received. A few people nodded greetings to William, and he introduced Eleanor as his intended, which made her blush. They visited the general store first, where William bought various supplies and introduced Eleanor to the storekeeper, a jovial man named Mr. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson came out from the back and immediately took Eleanor under her wing, asking about her journey and offering advice about living on a ranch. "You have got yourself a good man there," Mrs. Patterson said, nodding toward William. "He has been alone too long, if you ask me. It will be good for him to have a wife." "Has he been here long?" Eleanor asked, curious to learn more about William's past. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew more serious. "About 7 years now. He came out here after some tragedy back home, though he never talks about it. Worked himself nearly to death building that ranch. We were all glad when we heard he had sent for a bride." Eleanor filed that information away. So there was something in William's past, something painful enough that he had left everything behind and come out here to start over. She understood that impulse better than most. They met the minister next, a kind older gentleman named Reverend Thompson. He seemed pleased to hear they wanted to marry the next day and suggested they come to the church at 10 in the morning. When Eleanor mentioned that she did not have a proper wedding dress, he assured her that a clean Sunday dress would be perfectly appropriate for a frontier wedding. As they were leaving the church, a woman approached them. She was about Eleanor's age, with blonde hair and a friendly smile. "William Foster, is this the young lady we have all been hearing about?" William smiled, which Eleanor noticed he did not do often. "Eleanor, this is Sarah Mitchell. Her husband owns the neighboring ranch to the east." "It is wonderful to meet you," Sarah said, clasping Eleanor's hands warmly. "We have been so curious. You must come to dinner soon once you are settled. I would love to have another woman nearby to talk to." Eleanor found herself warming to Sarah immediately. "I would like that very much." They chatted for a few more minutes before Sarah had to leave, but she extracted a promise from Eleanor to visit within the next few weeks. As they walked back to the wagon, Eleanor felt hopeful. Maybe she could build a community here, make friends, have a real life. On the ride home, William was quiet. Eleanor glanced at him several times, noting the tension in his jaw. Finally, she gathered her courage and asked, "Is something wrong?" William was silent for a long moment, then said, "I need to tell you something before tomorrow. It is only fair that you know before we marry." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "All right. I told you I came from Missouri," William began, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "What I did not tell you is why I left. I was married before Eleanor. Her name was Catherine. We had been married for 2 years when she got sick. It was consumption. She died slowly, and there was nothing I could do to help her. After she passed, I could not stay there anymore. Everything reminded me of her. So I sold everything and came out here to start over." Eleanor absorbed this information. So that was the source of his sadness, the shadow she had sensed in him. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been terrible." "It was," William acknowledged. "And I want you to know that I am not looking for someone to replace her. She is gone, and I have made my peace with that. But I am ready to build something new with someone new. I just wanted you to know the truth before we married." Eleanor thought about this for a while. "Thank you for telling me," she finally said. "I appreciate your honesty." "Does it change anything?" William asked, and she could hear the worry in his voice. "If you want more time or if you have changed your mind, I would understand." "It does not change anything," Eleanor said firmly. "We both came here hoping for a fresh start." "Your past does not frighten me, William." The relief on his face was palpable. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a companionable silence now, not an awkward one. That evening, Eleanor took special care with supper, making a roast with vegetables and even attempting a simple pie with some dried apples she had found. William praised the meal effusively, and after they had cleaned up together, they sat on the porch again. "Tomorrow we will be married," William said, stating the obvious. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she studied them carefully. "I want you to know that I will do my best to be a good husband to you," William continued. "I know this is not a traditional courtship. We barely know each other. But I promise to treat you with respect and kindness and to work every day to build a good life for us." Eleanor looked up at him then, meeting his eyes in the twilight. "I promise the same," she said. "I will do my best to be a good wife to you." They sat there together as darkness fell, both of them contemplating the step they would take in the morning. Eleanor felt nervous but also excited. Despite everything, despite the strangeness of their situation, she liked William Foster. She respected him. And she thought that perhaps, given time, something real could grow between them. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Eleanor woke early and took great care with her appearance. She had one good dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She washed her hair and pinned it up carefully, leaving a few soft curls around her face. When she looked at herself in the small mirror on the dresser, she saw a woman who looked hopeful and alive, not the pale ghost she had been in Boston. William was waiting for her when she came out. He had cleaned up and put on what must be his best clothes, a clean white shirt and dark pants. His hair was neatly combed and still damp from washing. When he saw her, he went very still. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Eleanor blush. "Thank you," she said softly. "You look very handsome." They rode into town together, and Eleanor felt her nerves growing with each passing mile. This was really happening. In less than an hour, she would be married to this man, would promise to spend the rest of her life with him. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. The church was small but well maintained. Reverend Thompson was waiting for them, along with his wife who had agreed to serve as a witness. The Pattersons were there too, having closed the store for an hour to attend the ceremony. The ceremony itself was simple and brief. Eleanor and William stood before the minister and repeated the traditional vows. When it came time to exchange rings, William produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. He slipped it onto Eleanor's finger with gentle care, and she looked down at it with wonder. She was a married woman now. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thompson said with a smile. William looked at Eleanor, silently asking permission. She gave a small nod, and he leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief and gentle, but Eleanor felt the warmth of it spread through her entire body. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson insisted they all come to the general store for cake and coffee. She had baked a small cake to celebrate, which touched Eleanor deeply. These people barely knew her, but they were welcoming her into their community. Sarah Mitchell arrived with her husband James, and they offered their congratulations. James was a tall man with a ready laugh, and he clapped William on the shoulder. "About time you found yourself a wife, Foster. Maybe now you will stop working yourself to death." "Maybe," William allowed with a small smile. They spent about an hour socializing before William indicated it was time to head back to the ranch. Eleanor said her goodbyes, promising Sarah again that she would visit soon, and then they were on the wagon heading home. Eleanor was very aware that this time when she returned to the ranch, it would be as William's wife. The spare room would remain empty tonight. She would share William's room, his bed. The thought made her nervous but not frightened. She trusted him, she realized. In just a few days, he had shown her more kindness and consideration than she had received in years. The sun was beginning to set by the time they reached the ranch. William helped Eleanor down from the wagon, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other. Then William said, "I thought we could have a quiet evening, just us. Is that all right?" "That sounds perfect," Eleanor said. They prepared supper together, working in easy companionship. The meal was simple but satisfying, and they ate slowly, talking about the day, about the people they had met. When the dishes were washed and put away, William took Eleanor's hand. "Come sit with me," he said, leading her to the porch. They sat together on the old bench, watching the stars begin to appear. William still held her hand, his thumb gently stroking across her knuckles. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, feeling safe and content. "Eleanor," William said after a while, his voice soft in the darkness, "I know this day has been overwhelming. We do not have to rush anything tonight. We have the rest of our lives." Eleanor appreciated his sensitivity, but she also felt ready to become his wife fully. "I am not afraid," she said quietly. "I trust you." William turned to look at her, and even in the starlight she could see the emotion in his eyes. "I will be gentle," he promised. "I care about your comfort, about what you feel." "I know," Eleanor said, and she did know. Whatever else she might be uncertain about, she was sure that William would never hurt her. He stood and offered his hand, and she took it. He led her inside to his room, their room now, and closed the door behind them. The room was simple like the rest of the house, but clean and tidy. The bed was large and covered with a thick quilt. William lit a lamp on the small table, casting a warm glow through the room. Then he turned to Eleanor and cupped her face in his hands. "You are my wife now," he said, as if trying to believe it himself. "My wife." "And you are my husband," Eleanor replied. He kissed her then, really kissed her for the first time. It started gentle but grew deeper, and Eleanor felt something awaken inside her that she had never experienced before. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, William began to carefully remove the pins from her hair. It fell down around her shoulders in long, dark waves, and he ran his fingers through it with evident appreciation. "Beautiful," he murmured. What followed was tender and patient. William took his time, making sure Eleanor was comfortable, checking with her frequently. There was some pain, as she had expected, but also something else, a connection and intimacy that she had not anticipated. When it was over, William held her close, murmuring words of affection and praise. Eleanor lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She felt changed, transformed from a girl into a woman, from a stranger into a wife. And when she finally drifted off to sleep, warm and safe in William's embrace, she felt something she had not felt in years: hope. The days that followed fell into a pattern. William rose early to work the ranch, and Eleanor maintained the house, cooked meals, and began learning to tend a garden. William was patient in teaching her about frontier life, showing her how to use the tools and explaining the reasons behind various tasks. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, talking about their days. William began to open up more about his past, about growing up in Missouri, about his parents and his first wife. Eleanor shared stories about her childhood in Boston, about her parents before they died, about the books she had loved to read. They also grew more comfortable with each other physically. The initial awkwardness faded, replaced by genuine affection and desire. Eleanor found herself looking forward to the nights when William would pull her close, when they would come together in the darkness with increasing confidence and pleasure. About 2 weeks after the wedding, Eleanor made good on her promise and visited Sarah Mitchell. William rode her over on Daisy, the gentle mare, and Eleanor was proud of how much she had improved in her riding. Sarah welcomed her warmly, and they spent a pleasant afternoon drinking tea and talking. "You look happy," Sarah observed. "Marriage suits you." "I think it does," Eleanor admitted. "William is a good man." "He is," Sarah agreed. "And he looks happier than I have ever seen him." "You have been good for him, Eleanor." As October turned to November, Eleanor settled more deeply into her new life. She made bread and soap, preserved vegetables from the garden for winter, and learned to churn butter. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her life in Boston had never been. Here, she could see the results of her labor. She was building something real. William, for his part, seemed to grow lighter as the weeks passed. He smiled more often, and the shadows in his eyes began to fade. He was attentive and affectionate with Eleanor, always making sure she knew she was appreciated. He brought her small gifts from town: a new apron, a book he thought she might enjoy, a pretty ribbon for her hair. One evening in late November, as they sat together after supper, William took Eleanor's hand and said, "I need to tell you something." Eleanor looked at him with concern. "What is it?" "When I wrote to the agency," William began slowly, "I did not expect to feel this way. I thought we would have a practical arrangement, a partnership. I did not expect to fall in love." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "William." "But I have," he continued, his blue-gray eyes intense. "I have fallen in love with you, Eleanor. The way you laugh, the way you hum while you cook, the way you look at the sunset like it is a miracle, everything about you. I love you, and I needed you to know." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not expect it either, but somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." William pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both had tears on their cheeks. They sat there holding each other for a long time, marveling at the unexpected gift they had been given. That night, their lovemaking was different, infused with the knowledge of their feelings for each other. Afterward, lying in bed together, Eleanor felt completely at peace. She had come to Texas seeking an escape, but she had found so much more. She had found home. Winter came to South Texas, which meant cooler days and cold nights, but nothing like the harsh winters Eleanor had known in Boston. Life on the ranch continued. with William working to prepare for the spring calving season and Eleanor managing the household. Christmas approached, and Eleanor wanted to make it special. It would be their first holiday together as a married couple. She had been saving eggs and butter to make special cakes and cookies. She embroidered a new shirt for William, working on it in secret while he was out with the cattle. William surprised her on Christmas Eve by bringing home a small pine tree that he had found growing near the creek. "I know city folks like to have a tree at Christmas," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I thought you might miss it." Eleanor threw her arms around him, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. They decorated the tree together with strings of popcorn and bows made from scraps of fabric. It was simple but beautiful, and Eleanor loved it. On Christmas morning, William gave her a music box he had ordered from San Antonio. It played a soft, sweet melody, and Eleanor was overcome with emotion. "It is too much," she protested, even as she clutched it to her chest. "Nothing is too much for you," William said firmly. He seemed pleased by her reaction. Eleanor gave him the shirt she had made, and he put it on immediately, praising her needlework. They spent the day together in quiet celebration, cooking a special meal and exchanging small gifts. In the evening, they sat by the fire, and William read aloud from the book of poetry he had given Eleanor earlier that month. As Eleanor listened to his deep voice reading about love and devotion, she reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been miserable and desperate in Boston. Now she was here in Texas, married to a good man who loved her, building a life that felt meaningful and real. The new year brought changes. In late January, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be certain before telling William. When she finally shared the news one evening over supper, he looked stunned. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, smiling at his expression. "In late summer, I think." William came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have made me so happy, happier than I ever thought I could be again." "You have made me happy too," Eleanor said, holding him tight. "So very happy." The pregnancy progressed well, though Eleanor experienced morning sickness for the first few months. William was attentive and worried, insisting she rest more and not work too hard. Eleanor found his concern touching, even when it became a bit overbearing. Sarah Mitchell came to visit often, bringing supplies and advice. She had 3 children of her own and was a wealth of information. "You are in good hands with William," she assured Eleanor. "That man would move mountains for you." As spring arrived and Eleanor's belly began to show, William became even more protective. He hired a young man named Danny to help with the ranch work so he could stay closer to the house. Eleanor protested that she was not an invalid, but secretly, she enjoyed having him nearby more often. They spent long evenings planning for the baby, discussing names and making preparations. William built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving designs into the headboard. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. In June, William rode into town and returned with Dr. Harrison, the town physician. He wanted to introduce Eleanor to the doctor and make sure everything was progressing normally. Dr. Harrison examined Eleanor and pronounced her healthy and the baby strong. "First babies can take their time," he warned. "Send for me when the pains start coming regular, and I will come out as quick as I can." As summer heat settled over Texas, Eleanor grew large and uncomfortable. William fretted constantly, which Eleanor found both annoying and endearing. She tried to continue her normal activities, but the weight of the baby made everything more difficult. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch trying to catch a breeze, Eleanor felt the first real contraction. She gasped and clutched her belly, and William was immediately alert. "Was that the baby?" he asked anxiously. "I think so," Eleanor said. "But it is just the beginning. It could be hours yet." William insisted on riding for the doctor immediately, and Eleanor did not argue. As he saddled Buck, she went inside and tried to prepare. Sarah had told her what to expect, but knowing and experiencing were two different things. William returned within 2 hours with Dr. Harrison, and to Eleanor's relief, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah had insisted on coming when she heard the news, and Eleanor was grateful for her presence. William hovered anxiously until Dr. Harrison shooed him out of the room. The labor was long and difficult. Eleanor had never experienced pain like this before, and there were moments when she thought she could not bear it. But Sarah held her hand and encouraged her, and Dr. Harrison gave calm, competent instructions. And outside the door she could hear William pacing, his presence a comfort even though he could not be with her. As dawn broke, Eleanor gave one final push and the baby came into the world with a loud cry. "It is a boy, Doctor," Harrison announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Sarah cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "William," she called out, her voice weak but happy. "Come meet your son." The door burst open and William rushed in, his face pale with worry. But when he saw Eleanor holding the baby, alive and smiling, his expression transformed. He approached slowly, as if afraid to startle them, and looked down at his son with wonder. "Can I hold him?" he asked tentatively. Eleanor carefully transferred the baby to William's arms. He held the infant with surprising confidence, cradling him gently. The baby stopped crying and opened his eyes, seeming to study his father's face. "Hello, little one," William whispered. "I am your papa. Welcome to the world." Eleanor watched them together and felt tears stream down her face. These were her men, her family. She had traveled across the country to marry a stranger, and she had gained everything she had ever wanted. They named the baby Thomas, after William's father. Thomas Foster was a good baby, sleeping relatively well and eating enthusiastically. William was a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he was not working the ranch. Eleanor often found him in the middle of the night, holding Thomas and talking to him softly about the ranch, the cattle, the stars. As fall arrived and Thomas grew stronger, Eleanor began to feel more like herself again. She resumed her household duties gradually, with William's help. They worked together as a team, caring for the baby, maintaining the house, and running the ranch. One evening in late October, almost exactly a year since Eleanor had arrived in Texas, they sat on the porch together. Thomas was asleep in his cradle inside, and they could hear him making small baby snores through the open window. "You ever regret it?" William asked suddenly. "Leaving Boston, marrying a stranger, coming out here to this rough life," Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "Never," she said firmly. "Not once. This is the happiest I have ever been, William." "I think about that day at the train station sometimes," William said, "when I first saw you. You looked so scared and uncertain, and I thought maybe I had made a terrible mistake, asking someone to give up everything and come out here." "What changed your mind?" Eleanor asked. "You smiled," William said simply. "It was the next day when I showed you around the ranch. You smiled at something, I cannot even remember what, and it was like the sun coming out. That was when I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could make this work." Eleanor thought back to those early days, to the awkwardness and uncertainty. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I had taken such a leap of faith, and I did not know if I had made the right choice. But you were so kind, so considerate. You made me feel safe. You made me believe in love again," William said, reaching over to take her hand. "After Catherine died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would just work the ranch until I was old and die alone. But then you came, and you brought life and warmth and love into this house. You saved me, Eleanor." "We saved each other," Eleanor corrected gently. "I was drowning in Boston, William. I had no future, no hope. You gave me a home and a purpose and a family. You gave me everything." They sat together in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars appear. Inside, Thomas stirred and made a small sound before settling back into sleep. This was their life now, full and rich and real. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under William's careful management, and they were able to expand their operations. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere. When he was 2, Eleanor became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1886 she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret. Margaret had her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she wrapped William completely around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Thomas was initially suspicious of this small intruder, but gradually became a protective big brother. Eleanor maintained her friendship with Sarah Mitchell, and they visited back and forth regularly, their children playing together. The community of Brownsville embraced Eleanor completely, and she no longer felt like an outsider. William proved to be everything Eleanor could have wanted in a husband. He was steady and reliable, hardworking and kind. He made her laugh, supported her dreams, and loved her with a quiet devotion that never wavered. Their physical relationship deepened over the years, becoming more comfortable and satisfying as they learned each other's bodies and desires. They had their challenges, of course. There were years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, both to themselves and their children. There were disagreements and frustrations, as any married couple has, but through it all, they faced everything together. They had built something solid and lasting, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. They had taken a chance on each other, 2 lonely people seeking connection, and they had found something rare and precious. One evening in the summer of 1890, Eleanor and William sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 8 now, tall and serious like his father. Margaret was 4, bright and talkative. Eleanor was pregnant again, just beginning to show, and they were hoping for another boy to help Thomas with the ranch work someday. "Do you remember writing that letter to the agency?" Eleanor asked William. "The one that brought me here," William smiled. "I remember. I must have written it a dozen times before I finally sent it. I kept thinking no one would want to come out here, to this middle-of-nowhere place, to marry a widower rancher with a sad past." "I am so glad you finally sent it," Eleanor said. "I shudder to think what my life would be like if you had not. I would probably still be in Boston, bitter and alone. And I would still be here, working myself into an early grave," William said. He reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "That letter changed everything. Your smile changed everything for me," Eleanor said. "Do you remember when I first smiled? You said it was like the sun coming out." "I remember," William said softly. "It was when I showed you the creek. You looked at the water sparkling in the sunlight and you smiled, really smiled, and I thought maybe I could fall in love again. Maybe I could be happy again." "And were you right?" Eleanor asked, though she knew the answer. "More than I ever imagined," William said. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They sat there as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Their children's laughter rang out across the prairie. Inside the house that William had built with his own hands, dinner was cooking and the table was set. The cradle that had held Thomas and Margaret waited in the bedroom for the new baby to arrive in a few months. This was their life, built from nothing but hope and determination and love. Two strangers who had taken a chance on each other had created something beautiful and lasting. They had built a family, a home, a future. As darkness fell and they called the children inside for supper, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had left Boston 8 years ago with nothing but a small trunk and a desperate hope for something better. She had traveled across the country to marry a man she had never met, taking the biggest risk of her life, and it had paid off beyond her wildest dreams. She had found love, real love, the kind that grew deeper and stronger with each passing year. She had found a partner who respected her and valued her, who made her laugh and held her when she cried. She had found a home, not just a building but a place where she belonged completely. William had found those things too. He had emerged from the shadow of his grief and built a new life, one full of joy and purpose. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone. As they gathered around the table that evening saying grace before their meal, Eleanor looked at each beloved face. William, her husband, the man who had given her everything. Thomas, her firstborn, already showing signs of the good man he would become. Margaret, her daughter, bright and sweet and full of life. And the baby growing inside her, another gift, another blessing. She thought about that young woman who had arrived at the Brownsville train station 8 years ago, scared and uncertain but desperately hopeful. If she could speak to that younger version of herself, she would tell her not to be afraid. She would tell her that taking this leap of faith would be the best decision she ever made. She would tell her that love was real, that it was possible to find happiness even after loss and loneliness. She would tell her that sometimes the biggest risks brought the greatest rewards. But most of all, she would tell her about that first smile, the one that made William believe in love again, the one that changed everything. After supper, they put the children to bed together, working as the team they had become. Thomas wanted a story, and William sat on his bed and told him about the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the land they lived on. Margaret wanted a lullaby, and Eleanor sang softly until her daughter's eyes closed. Then they went to their own room, the room they had shared for 8 years now. William closed the door and pulled Eleanor into his arms, holding her with the easy affection of long familiarity. "I love you," he said, as he did every night. "I love you too," Eleanor replied, as she always did. They lay down together in the darkness, Eleanor curled against William's side, his arm around her shoulders. This was home. This was family. This was love. Outside, the Texas night was vast and full of stars. The prairie stretched out in all directions, wild and beautiful. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed softly. A coyote howled in the distance. The wind rustled through the grass with a sound like the ocean. But inside the small house that William Foster had built with his own hands, all was warm and peaceful. Inside were 4 people, soon to be 5, bound together by love and commitment and shared dreams. Inside was everything that mattered. Eleanor drifted off to sleep, listening to William's heartbeat, the same steady rhythm that had comforted her every night for 8 years. She dreamed of the future, of watching their children grow, of growing old with the man beside her. She dreamed of all the years still to come, full of love and laughter and life. She had come to Texas seeking escape and had found everything she never knew she needed. She had married a stranger and discovered her soulmate. She had taken the greatest risk of her life and won the greatest prize. And it had all started with a letter, a leap of faith, and a smile that made a lonely cowboy believe in love again. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Foster family grew and thrived. In January of 1891, Eleanor gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel. The ranch expanded as William's reputation for quality cattle spread throughout South Texas. Thomas began learning the business seriously, riding out with his father and learning everything about ranch management. Margaret proved to have a gift for animals, particularly horses. By the time she was 6, she could gentle even the most skittish colt, speaking to them in her soft voice until they trusted her completely. William watched his daughter with evident pride, seeing qualities in her that reminded him of both himself and Eleanor. The years brought changes to Brownsville, too. The town grew steadily as more people moved west. New businesses opened, and a proper school was built, which Eleanor insisted all 3 of their children attend. Education was important to her, and William supported her completely, even though it meant the children could not help with ranch work as much as they might have otherwise. Sarah Mitchell remained Eleanor's closest friend, and their families spent many holidays and celebrations together. The Pattersons retired from the general store but remained in town, and Eleanor visited them regularly, bringing baked goods and news. As the children grew older, William and Eleanor found themselves with more time together. They still sat on the porch most evenings, talking about their day, making plans for the future. Their love had matured into something solid and enduring, tested by time and trials and found unbreakable. In the summer of 1895, when Thomas was 13, Margaret was 9, and Daniel was 4, Eleanor and William celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary. They had a small party, inviting the Mitchells and a few other close friends. As Eleanor looked around at the gathering, at the home full of love and laughter, she marveled at how far they had come. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, William and Eleanor stood on their porch looking out over the land they had built their life on. William's arm was around Eleanor's waist, and her head rested on his shoulder. 13 years, William said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you stepped off that train. Other times it feels like you have been here forever. I know what you mean, Eleanor said. I can barely remember what my life was like before you. Do you ever miss Boston? William asked. It was a question he had asked before over the years, always with a note of concern. Never, Eleanor said firmly, just as she always did. Boston was where I grew up, but Texas is home. This is home. You are home. William kissed the top of her head. You gave me back my life, he said. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions, but you made me want to live again. And you gave me a life worth living, Eleanor replied. I was so lost before I came here, William. I felt like I had no purpose, no future. You gave me everything. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. 13 years of marriage, 3 children, countless memories both joyful and challenging. They had built something that would last, something that would continue long after they were gone through their children and eventually their grandchildren. What are you thinking about? William asked after a while. I am thinking about that letter you wrote, Eleanor said. The one that started all of this. I wonder what would have happened if you had never sent it or if I had never answered. I would rather not think about that, William said with a slight shudder. I cannot imagine my life without you now. Nor I without you, Eleanor said, but I am grateful every day that we both had the courage to take that chance. So am I, William agreed. Inside the house, they could hear Daniel calling out from his room. Eleanor smiled. Probably had a bad dream. I should go to him. I will come with you, William said. They went inside together, just as they did everything. Daniel was indeed frightened by a nightmare, and they sat with him until he calmed down, both of them providing comfort and reassurance. This, too, was part of their life together, these small moments of parenting, of partnership, of love expressed in ordinary ways. After Daniel was settled again, they returned to their own room. William helped Eleanor undress, his hands gentle and familiar after all these years. They made love slowly and tenderly, taking their time, savoring each touch and kiss. It was different than those early passionate encounters, but no less meaningful. It was the lovemaking of two people who knew each other completely and loved what they knew. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Eleanor said, "Thank you." "For what?" William asked, his voice drowsy. "For everything," Eleanor said. "For writing that letter, for being the man you are, for loving me." "Thank you for answering," William replied, "for coming all this way. For your smile that first week that made me believe we could make this work. For being the best wife and mother I could have asked for loving me back." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, content and at peace. Outside, the Texas night continued its ancient patterns, the stars wheeling overhead, the wind whispering through the grass, the cattle settling down for the night. The world went on its way, indifferent to the small dramas of human lives. But inside the foster home, two people who had taken a chance on each other so many years ago slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had found what everyone seeks: a true partner, a real love, a home in each other's hearts. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a young man, tall and capable like his father, and began taking on more responsibility for the ranch. Margaret's skill with horses became known throughout the region, and people began bringing their difficult animals to her. Daniel showed an aptitude for numbers and kept track of the ranch's accounts from a young age. William's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines appeared at the corners of Eleanor's eyes, but they remained as devoted to each other as ever. They still held hands on the porch in the evenings. They still made love regularly and with enthusiasm. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. In 1900, Thomas met a young woman named Rebecca at a church social, and it was clear from the start that it was serious. William and Eleanor watched their son court her with approval. Rebecca was kind and hardworking, and she fit into the family easily. They married in the spring of 1901, and Thomas brought her to live at the ranch. Eleanor worried briefly about having another woman in the house, but Rebecca was respectful and eager to learn. She and Eleanor developed a warm relationship, more like friends than mother and daughter-in-law. William built an addition onto the house so the young couple could have some privacy while still being close to help with the ranch work. In 1902, Thomas and Rebecca had their first child, a girl they named Catherine after William's first wife. When William held his granddaughter for the first time, he wept openly, something Eleanor had rarely seen him do. It was a healing of old wounds, a bridge between past and present. Margaret, meanwhile, showed no interest in marriage, focusing instead on her work with the horses. She was 18 now, beautiful and independent, and Eleanor sometimes worried about her future. But William assured her that Margaret would find her way in her own time. Daniel, at 11, was already talking about going to college, perhaps studying business or law. Eleanor encouraged this dream, even though it meant he might move away someday. She wanted her children to have opportunities, to make their own choices about their futures. One evening in the fall of 1902, Eleanor and William were sitting on their porch as usual when she turned to him and said, "We did well, did we not?" "What do you mean?" William asked. "Our life," Eleanor said, gesturing around them. "Our family. We took such a risk all those years ago, but it worked out. We built something good." William looked out over the land at the house they had expanded over the years, at the barn and corrals, at the cattle grazing in the distance. He thought about their children, all three grown or nearly so, healthy and happy and finding their own paths. He thought about the grandchild sleeping inside, the first of what he hoped would be many. "We did very well," he agreed. "Better than I could have imagined that day when I wrote that letter to the agency." "I still remember reading your letter," Eleanor said. "I must have read it 100 times before I wrote back. I was so nervous." "I was nervous too," William admitted. "When I went to meet your train, I almost turned around 3 times. I kept thinking, what if she takes one look at me and gets back on the train?" Eleanor laughed. "I was thinking the same thing. What if he is terrible? What if I made a huge mistake? But then I saw you, and you looked so worried and hopeful all at once, and I thought maybe it would be all right." "When did you know you loved me?" William asked. It was a question they had asked each other before, but the answer was always interesting. Eleanor thought about it. "I think it was gradual," she said. "But there was a moment about a month after we married. You had been out working all day and you came in exhausted, but you still took the time to tell me about your day, to ask about mine. You made me feel like what I did mattered, like I mattered. That was when I started to realize that this was not just a practical arrangement, that you truly cared about me." "I fell in love with your smile," William said. "I have told you that before, but it was more than that. It was your courage in coming all this way. Your willingness to try, to learn, to build something with me. You could have been bitter about your circumstances, but you chose to be hopeful instead. That is what I fell in love with." Eleanor reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. "We were lucky," she said. "So many mail-order bride situations do not work out, but ours did." "It was not luck," William said firmly. "It was work. We both worked at this, Eleanor. We chose to be kind to each other, to be patient, to give it a real chance. We built this love day by day, choice by choice." Eleanor nodded. He was right, of course. Love was not just a feeling that happened to you. It was something you built and maintained, something you chose every day. And they had chosen each other, over and over again, for 20 years now. Inside the house, they heard the baby crying and Rebecca's soft voice soothing her. Thomas's deeper voice joined in, and there was laughter. Their family, their legacy, continuing into the next generation. "I would do it all again," Eleanor said softly. "Every bit of it. The fear, the uncertainty, the risk. I would do it all again to end up right here with you." "So would I," William said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Foster. That letter I wrote sending for you was the smartest thing I ever did." They sat there as night fell, holding hands and watching the stars appear. They had been doing this for 20 years now, and Eleanor hoped they would do it for 20 more. She was 43 years old and William was 50, and they had a good life stretching ahead of them still. The ranch would continue, passed down to Thomas eventually. Margaret would find her own path, whatever that might be. Daniel would pursue his dreams of education. And Eleanor and William would grow old together, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that would last. As they finally went inside that night, Eleanor paused and looked back at the porch where they had spent so many evenings. This had become their special place, where they reconnected after long days, where they planned and dreamed and simply enjoyed each other's company. "What are you thinking?" William asked, coming to stand beside her. "I am thinking that I am grateful," Eleanor said, "for all of it, for you, for our children, for this life we have built. I am so very grateful." William pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I am grateful too," he said, "every single day." They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had for 20 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys. The ranch would require attention, the grandchildren would need care, life would continue its inexorable forward motion. But tonight, they were simply William and Eleanor, husband and wife, lovers and partners. Two people who had taken a chance on each other so long ago and won the greatest prize of all, a true, lasting love. Eleanor drifted off to sleep thinking about that young woman who had stepped off the train in Brownsville 20 years ago, scared but hopeful, taking the biggest risk of her life. If she could go back and speak to that younger self, she would tell her that everything would be all right. Better than all right. Wonderful. She would tell her that the tall, worried man waiting on the platform would become the love of her life, that the ranch that seemed so rough and primitive would become home, that the 3 children she could not imagine yet would fill her life with purpose and joy. But most of all, she would tell her to remember that smile, the one that happened in the first week, the one that made William believe in love again. Because that smile was the beginning of everything good that followed. As Eleanor slept peacefully beside her husband, secure and loved after 20 years of marriage, the Texas stars shone down on the Foster ranch. The cattle settled in for the night. The horses drowsed in their stalls. Inside the house, 3 generations of Fosters slept, bound together by love and blood and the courage of 2 people who had dared to hope for something better. The lonely cowboy who had written that letter so long ago was lonely no more. The desperate young woman who had answered it had found her place in the world. Together, they had created a love story that would endure, passed down through the generations as an example of what courage and commitment could achieve. And it had all started with a letter, a train ride, and a smile that changed everything. A smile that made a lonely cowboy believe in love again, and in doing so, gave both of them the greatest gift imaginable. A true home, a real family, and a love that would last forever.